I feel sometimes in games we get a bit too hung up on the little intricacies, the little itty bits and pieces that help to differentiate one game from another. And while it is very healthy to think of new ways to tell a story in a video game, or to think of new ways to elaborately innovate gameplay, sometimes you just want to kill someone.
It's like action game-based therapy. You can look to the enjoyment felt when you look back on the city you've built, or overtaking someone on the last lap of Mario Kart, but hack and slashes are all about self-indulgence. They don't have to be designed too complicatedly, because as long as they function, the basic idea of a hack and slash is usually enough to keep you playing. They're a bit like racing games, you know what you're getting yourself into before you even boot up the game. And because it's not too difficult to engineer a hack and slash game, the ones that stand out do so for pretty amazing reasons, in a world where you mix style with substance and bask in the majesty of your creation. If you're willing to put the time and effort in, you end with a game that does a bit more for you than just make you feel this rush of adrenaline and sense of power. So strap yourself in, and if you like, count how many enemies die in this video. It'll be a lot. The idea for a hack and slash game is so basic sometimes that you could take any character in video game history and stick them in a game like this. Thematically it might not work all the time, but it's just a fancier way of taking down enemies. Link from Legend of Zelda? Yeah, pretty easy. Batman? Alright, it's more of a beat 'em up, but yeah, piece of cake. That ninja cyborg from Metal Gear that nobody liked? Well, you've got to make him popular somehow.
I feel like Raiden could have been a very good character in Metal Gear Solid 2, but wasn't helped out by constantly being in the shadow of Snake, and if you don't know, he was quite good in the first game. But it sets up a scenario where in between the events of Metal Gear Solid 2 and 4, Raiden goes away, comes back awesome in Metal Gear Solid 4, and then you can play as the new and improved Raiden in a new game.
Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. I've really got to stop finding excuses to talk about you. Yes, it's a very fun game, but the reason why I think it's such a brilliantly made game is how seamless the switch from tactical espionage to full-on hack and slash is. Admittedly, they got Platinum Games involved and they're damn good at these kind of games, but it's not even comparable to what made Metal Gear the massive franchise it is today. Though it probably is, because despite the somewhat mindless, in the best possible way, nature of the gameplay, the story still keeps a political commentary as its highest priority. Throw in a samurai, an AI wolf robot, and the beefiest politician of all time, and we also achieve the same levels of Metal Gear lunacy as the main series. Maybe they're not too different after all. And maybe it shows Skyward Sword exactly how to integrate one-to-one sword controls without even a hint of motion controls. You know, maybe. Oh hey, Platinum Games! It's almost like you're quite good at making outrageous action games. Mind you, it became a thing when Clover Studios shut down and lots of key members branched out to found this new company. The same people responsible for Okami, Beautiful Joe and God Hand. So it perhaps wouldn't be much of a statement to say that there's some creative people behind the scenes here. Maybe that explains how we ended up with a hack and slash starring a shape-shifting witch who wears shoes made of guns. So yeah, Bayonetta's something different. A game so bizarre in its execution that you just can't help but love it. And yet it still keeps the staples of the hack and slash genre, so you've got something to latch onto. The uniqueness comes from how it treats the familiarity, using a style and basic setting before going absolutely crazy with it. It's the sort of game where you tell other people about specific scenarios out of context, and watch as their mind works overtime trying to justify it. Like, I just finished playing a game where the main protagonist is a girl with glasses and clothes made of her own hair. Or maybe, and then your hair became 4 massive hands and started to play volleyball with the boss you were just fighting. And while you can look at the sequel and argue that it's a better game, it did get rid of the incredibly ruthless QTEs, but I feel that you can never really replicate the impact felt when you play through Bayonetta for the first time.
I think, and I'm not 100% certain about this, Bayonetta, I think, had a plot of sorts, but I didn't really find myself too invested in it because I was having so much fun. I don't really mind, because it means that it's an excuse for more things to kill later in the game. You can't really complain about that. When you're thinking up brand new ideas for a hack and slash game, you've got to remember that they're not the most complicated games in the world. You're slicing your way through dozens of enemies. It never really would be. But if you really want to emphasize how crazy your game can be, then you might as well just fill it full of satire until you're up to your eyeballs in a self-referential Japanese fever dream.
Or as it's more commonly known, the No More Heroes series, and for the purpose of this video, No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle. Both games take a very similar stance towards cutting down hordes of mooks, with a backdrop of an attacker with no money and lots of assassins to kill. But for the actual hack and slashy bit, which this video is supposed to be about, I felt like the second game was really on the ball. Suddenly we've got way more boss fights, including some fights with the Supernatural, a spatially confused cosmonaut, Tara Strong with a sniper rifle, and a mech battle with a jock and his groupies. Any pretense left over from the first game that you should take all of this seriously was wrestled to the ground a long time ago. Having said that, Desperate Struggle does weave in an undercurrent that all this senseless and admittedly hilarious violence might not be the best thing to be doing, but in a way you can just chalk it up as the game knocking down any fourth wall in sight. It makes for an interesting commentary on what might have been forgotten amidst all this fancy killing, but it's probably not what you'll play this game for. Bit disappointed that the decision to improve on the first game's lifeless overworld resulted in removing the concept altogether, meaning that all the combat happens in very strict segments, but when it's this entertaining, I don't think I'll lose much sleep over it. Let me teach you about the rules of trilogies in modern media. If the first installment is amazing, good enough to warrant some time to develop a new game, you'll sometimes find that the sequel doesn't quite live up to the expectations set by the groundbreaking first game. Whether because the developers feel like they have to fix things that aren't broken, or have to show that the series is constantly moving forward, but there's a lot of mediocre sequels out there. And then the third game comes along and everything's perfect again.
When Devil May Cry showed up with flashy combat and a flippant protagonist, you can perhaps understand the disappointment when what replaced it was a far less refined and more broody game in Devil May Cry 2. So for the third game, Capcom went back to what made the first game such a great success and then covered it in buckets more style.
The world would certainly be a much less stylish place if it wasn't for both Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. In particular the third game, Dante's Awakening. Gone are the voice cracks of the first game and deadpan Dante from the second, to be replaced by the all-singing, all-dancing, hitting its stride at the perfect time, Devil May Cry 3. You think smacking all these enemies around is easy? Prepare to have everything you thought you knew about clearing entire rooms of enemies challenged by the game's normal setting. A game so challenging that they released it a year later with recalibrated difficulty. And yet strangely, the style of the game lines up near faultlessly with what the game tries to achieve, with Dante being all cocky and shit. There's not too many scenes where you get to control the motorbike as you ride against the laws of physics, but the gameplay mechanics are cultured to such a degree that it feels fucking amazing controlling Dante. And if a hack and slash game can make me step back and swear continuously because it's so satisfying, I'm not sure I can ask for much more. You'd be forgiven for thinking that all hack and slash style games are all inherently the same, where you can take different approaches with regards to characters, personalities, settings, the general tone of the game. You'll usually end up with the same basic game. But it's hard to really describe how satisfying it is to be so much stronger than anything else in this game. Hack and slash games turn you into an omni-powerful killing machine, some kind of god of war. 3. Kratos gets mad again.
I remember a time when people were using God of War as an excuse to criticise modern gaming for being too violent. Everywhere you go, you're surrounded with blood and gore. But it does serve a purpose, where if you really want to go through most of Greek mythology, slicing up pretty much everything in your way, you needn't look anywhere else.
And by the time you reach the end of the natural God of War trilogy, you're left with a dilemma brought about by the successes of the past two games. Where do you go now? What can you do which you haven't done before? Well, the developers went away and meticulously refined the core mechanics that were already world beaters before, and threw in dozens more jaw-dropping scenarios that keep the fires burning and the series as fresh as it was before. The combat seems a bit quicker than it was in God of War 2. You feel like an unstoppable destructive force from the very start, and it carries you through the game like little else. And remember those scenarios I mentioned? Well, with everything polished and restructured, it left the door open for God of War 3 to show what a God of War game would look and play like on the PS3. And yes, game developers will always take a chance to show just what this brand new game console is really capable of, how much you can stretch its limitations, but God of War 3 really pushes the boat out. From the opening assault on Mount Olympus to one of the largest bosses you'll ever fight, it's a game that evokes a sense of holy shit within you wherever and whenever it can.
This has been RabbidLuigi, and there are many ways of handling a trilogy in modern media. Maybe the second installment is the bad one, in which case the third one comes along as a kind of redemption. Maybe the third installment isn't quite as good, at which point it might be a step too far for that idea. Or maybe, and this is just like some kind of crazy speculation, you can be amazing from the word go.
Want to have a say on what I talk about next week? Leave a top 5 suggestion in the comments section below and go follow me on Twitter, where later in the week I'll be compiling the best submissions and setting up a vote over there. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that. First thing I should probably mention is because next week for me is full of many crazy things that will take up nearly all of my time, you're not likely to get a top 5 this time next week. I don't really want to rush one out in the little time I have, and hey, I've been doing them weekly for a while now, so I'm sure you can keep yourselves busy until then. But of course, if anything comes up or changes, Twitter and Facebook will be the first places I go. It's like the most niche news show of all time.